prove things true or false. It's a lot harder to prove things true. It's a lot easier to prove them false. And the more things you prove false, the closer you get to what the truth might be. So.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Oto Gomes Show. I'm your host, Oto Gomes. Today I have the most interesting man alive, I can tell you right now. Mike Wilkerson has always been interesting in asking unconventional questions. As a teen computer hobbyist turned hacker in the early 80s, his thirst for deeper knowledge led to wild adventures with some of the top hackers in the nation. But in 1985, the fun ended in a brief incarceration after being caught for his infiltration of computer servers at Microsoft and 3 other Seattle corporations. Though he has walked the straight and narrow since then, Mike's interest in the unquestionables has never waned. In the decades that followed, he evolved from a mischievous hacker to a benevolent backcracker. Love that. For over a decade now, Mike has lived and worked as a chiropractor on the Costa Blanca in Spain, where his mission is to improve the health of the world one spine and mind at a time. As a part-time independent researcher, he focuses primarily on alternative history, non-standard cosmologies, gigantism, catastrophism, and rapid petrification. His research and presentations are available on the Stellium 7 YouTube channel. The most interesting man alive, Mike Wilkerson. You are, man. You are so interesting. How are you today?
That's a hell of a moniker to live up to, though. I mean, come on.
Man, sitting around the fireplace
I'm sure my kids
you,
wouldn't agree with you.
Dude, sitting around the fireplace with you and just listening to just your journey, your story was like my jaw was dropped the whole time going like, what? Who am I sitting next to? Who is this guy?
I don't know.
So I want to get to know you better, man. I know I learned a lot about you when we were there at the Music in the Sky event, and which was amazing, by the way. Anybody listening, for sure, make time to go to an event like this where you're just surrounded by it's just like love and willingness to speak about these obscure topics, these topics that are not like normal mainstream narrative topics, and just mind expanding conversations. But I want to get to know you better. That's what my audience loves, is just getting to know the journey of the people that I'm interviewing. So tell me about your journey a little bit, if you can, because I know it's a lot. But what was specifically the red pill moment that kind of like shook you out of the normalized conversations and behaviors?
Yeah, well, there were many. It started young. I mean, I grew up in a very alternative fashion. My parents were hippie types, meditators, followers of Eastern gurus, and I grew up in a kind of a new agey atmosphere. And so I was already kind of the oddball in school from a very young age. And I was vegetarian as well, which didn't help for fitting in either at a time when nobody was vegetarian. Like I was the only one in the whole school. So I was kind of going against the grain from the get-go. And then in my early 20s, my father gave me a couple of books. He was also a very unusual character. And he gave me a book called Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper, and another called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. I don't remember the author's name to that. The Emperor Wears No Clothes was talking about the prohibition of marijuana and how that came about, and the dirty tricks that William Randolph Hearst and DuPont colluded on to basically, change the face of the earth as we know it. And so that was a big wake up for me. And then the book Behold a Pale Horse was written by a guy who was a Christian. So he was coming at it from a biblical angle, but he was basically just laying out the power structure of the world and all the different secret societies and non-secret societies that are actually working to run the world. And those organizations are all still very much there. And many of them are not secret, but they're, these like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and these kinds of organizations that basically it's, all the elite are getting together, like the Bilderberger Group or Davos. And so I knew about all that stuff when I was 22, 23. And he also went a lot into secret societies and the symbology that they use. There was a lot of talk about, finance and the formation of the Federal Reserve. And there was a chapter in there called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars that had to do with all the different ways in which they steer society secretly and get us to do what they want us to do. And so that was a first big wake up call for me. And I went through a lot of, inner work at that time, because it tends to bring on paranoia, especially when you're younger. And so eventually just decided to kind of let the whole thing go, because I wanted to focus on, doing what I could in the world to, help make it better. And so I didn't really go deep into it until 9/11. About 6 months before 9/11, a friend gave me a David Icke book that was called The Biggest Secret Ever, I think. And that was this 550-page book that was incredibly well written with loads of references. I looked in the back, and the bibliography was huge, and so I realized that there's a lot to what's being shared in this book that probably has substance. And I came away from that book thinking that even if 20% of what was in there was true, that we had a lot to be aware of and to worry about. And now 30 years later, 25 years later, 9/11. What was that? My daughter just
2001, so 23 years later.
23 years ago. Yeah. I think it's probably more like 80% is accurate. Yeah. And many of the things that were in that book have been exposed in mainstream consciousness, but most people don't have any kind of a memory. So they hear these little data points on, interesting things like, the Royals and Jimmy Savile and the Vatican and what they were doing to children and all that kind of stuff. And they never really kind of put it together and get a gestalt of the bigger picture and start to understand, wait a minute, this is more than just, random isolated events. So kind of had a renaissance there when it came to looking into all this stuff. And then 9/11 came about 6 months later, and I saw through the whole thing from the get-go. And then, 6 months or a year later, what was the first one? Loose Change came out, and other documentaries where they're just like,
Zeitgeist.
They were showing Zeitgeist, and they were just showing so much information. And, how do 3 towers fall with 2 planes? And, Building 7, there's just so much, going on with that. So, but I had started a family. I had 2 children, and I had started chiropractic college as well about a year later. And so I was knuckling down and focusing on education, and I was living in Sweden at the time. And so that was kind of my red pill moment. And then moving to Spain 13 years ago, after I'd been here 2-3 years, I met a guy who you just met on screen a moment ago, Alex Michael, also known as Conspiracy Music Guru. And we started, comparing notes and checking off the boxes and connecting dots. And we were, had a pretty cool interaction from the get-go. And then he brought up the topic of Earth shape and started asking me if I'd looked into that. And I was just, this guy he's a nutcase, even though we were on the same page with so many other things. I'm like, if he's willing to believe that, he's willing to believe anything. And then he's got no discernment. And if you believe everything, then you don't believe anything, in my opinion. You've got to be able to distinguish reality from fiction. And so that set me on a big, goose chase as well, because I had to debunk him. And that got harder and harder and harder. And I thought it was going to be very.
That's a path for everyone when it comes to that. Like I'm going to prove this wrong. It must be wrong. And
yeah,
then
this
as
is
you
going to be
go down,
so easy. I literally thought, he brought it up the first time. I thought he's crazy. I got to take everything he says from this point forward with a grain of salt. So I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear it. And then a couple of weeks later, he came into my office. He and his wife were patients of mine. And he brought it up again. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Now I've got to spend some time, to show him how stupid this idea is. And my first thought was I'll find some photographs of Earth from space, and found out they were composites, and even NASA admits that, and or just flat out CGI, and that there's continents change sizes and change colors, and there's just so much wrong with the photographs. And then I was like, well, the ISS, I'll just I went online, I found a live stream from the ISS, and there you can see the Earth turning, and it's clearly a ball. And he's like, have you ever heard of fisheye lenses? And I was like, one of my favorite subjects in school was geometry. So spherical trigonometry, like calculating curvature based on the size of the radius of a ball. That was stuff I enjoyed doing in high school, And so when I knew that what the size of the Earth was, and I knew the distance that the ISS is supposedly floating at, I realized, wait a minute, I'm seeing practically, at least half of a hemisphere, and I'm like, that's a fisheye lens. And then if you look closely in some of the videos, you can actually see that parts of the ISS are warping because of the fisheye. And I'm like, why would they do that? Why would they have a fisheye lens if, they could just have a normal rectilinear lens that's going to show the image as close as possible to what is, you would see with the naked eye. And it took me 6 months to wrap my head around that idea. And I started making observations of my own. I live in Spain. I live on a part of Spain where it comes out to a little peninsula, and off the coast of that peninsula is Ibiza, or Ibiza. And it's 90 kilometers away, roughly 60 miles. And so I started doing the math on that. And I was like, I've seen Ibiza very clearly on a winter's day when there's no humidity, atmospheric occlusion that might, warp or bend the light. And I've seen it clear as a day. Like, how much of that island should be obscured behind a bulge of water if the Earth is curving? And so I started to do the math on it, and I went to the most conservative Earth curve calculator that I could find, which was on Metabunk. And they're it's an anti-flat Earth website, basically, that's run by a guy named Mick West. And I figure I'll use their calculator, because that'll be, if it's skewed at all, it's going to be skewed in favor of the ball. And so I plugged in the numbers, my observation height, the distance, what should be obscured. And the numbers I put in, it was 200 meters of the island, roughly 600 feet of that island should be behind the curve at that distance, and my viewing altitude. And I took a photograph with my phone on a winter's day. I didn't even have some powerful zoom. And I got that thing back. I put it on the computer, and there was 2 peaks and a saddle between them. And I went onto Wikipedia, and I found the altitudes of the peaks. And then I got on Google Earth looking from above, and you can run the cursor over and you can figure out what the altitude is of the valley. And the valley was 200 meters. And so I immediately realized that valley should be at water level at that distance. So how much more than that am I seeing? And so I calculated the peaks and the valley, and then the ratio between those, and the ratio between the top of the bottom of the valley and the water level. And I saw that none of the island was missing.
Wow.
and that was with my phone. And so I'm like, okay, that means if there's no curvature over 90 kilometers, that means the next 90 kilometers better have twice as much curvature, or we don't live on a ball. And so that was, and that's not how the ocean works. It doesn't undulate, it does if there's storms, but when it's calm and it's laying flat, the horizon is horizontal. So yeah, it's, I don't call myself a flat earther, but I'm definitely a globe skeptic, and I'm open to all kinds of different potential cosmological models. And I've come to the conclusion ultimately that maybe what we're on is beyond comprehension, and you definitely can't get outside of it, unless you're NASA, and they clearly haven't. Because if they had, they would be showing us real footage, and everything they've got is CGI and harness fails and bubbles in space and CGI layering glitches and fisheye lenses. And like, why so much fakery if it's real? And so, yeah, I'm open to a lot of different possibilities when it comes to what the Earth is, but I'm pretty confident about what it isn't. And that's really how the scientific method works, right? You eliminate things and you get closer and closer to the truth.
That's what I love about you. You have a very healthy level of skepticism where you lean towards, well, let's look at what is being said and try to debunk, right? Try to go through the facts of what we're presented with. And with this topic, I've done it myself. If you guys that are listening are like, what are you talking about, Otto? You're crazy. Go to David Weiss. Download
David's
his app.
Yeah.
David's amazing. I interviewed him like a year or two ago.
David Weiss was speaking in Anarchapulco. That's what this shirt is from.
Oh, yeah.
And I was there as a speaker as well in February. And you mentioned in the last bit of that bio that the stuff that I've been interested in on my channel, and so I've got some pretty far out stuff that's not flat Earth, but it's very much related in different ways. So I asked to follow David because we were going to be presenting on the same day. I'm like, I knew he was going to have a packed house because he's such a great speaker and he's done so many incredible interviews. So I was like, I'm kind of dumb to do this because I knew he was going to just knock it out of the park with an amazing presentation. But I asked specifically to follow him because I figured the chairs will still be full. It was my stuff and the things that he covers are very interrelated. So it was a good choice, and that was an amazing conference. It was a lot of fun, as was Music and Sky. Just truly,
like
you said.
I saw B. Is it B for Bitcoin on the Reborn there?
Yeah, because there's a lot of. It started really as a crypto thing, which is your shtick, right? That's my shtick. Yeah, and I that's I haven't gone really deep into that whole world yet. They had it's health freedom. A lot of great speakers speaking on the subjects of health and truth when it comes to matters of health. And you had the crypto stuff, and you had people looking into like homesteading and getting off grid and extracting yourself from the matrix more and more in every way you can, and being more and more self-sufficient and independent. And so it was just 5 amazing days with incredible people.
I mean, that's why I do these interviews, just to help everyone listening to expand their perspective of this reality in a way where they can start to cut dependency. Because I believe what keeps most inside, the public sector matrix is the level of dependency that they have on those systems, and really, how they relate, like how one relates to these systems based on how they identify with themselves, keeps you locked in that cycle. And that's what I love about these interviews, is just to expand, like, hey, let's be curious. The curiosity.
Yeah. And the belief also that they don't have a choice, that the mandate is a real mandate. Right. And, they don't understand that they're being offered something, and it's being presented with the illusion of, mandate or obligation, but they really are accepting an offer. And the number of patients, excuse me, the number of patients that I've had in the last 4 years who have regretted their health decisions and have, experienced degradation of health on a high scale, that have told me that, well, I got it because I needed to, see my mom, or I needed it for my job, or I needed it for school. And how much do you value your health? And are you just going to trust the experts? Like, when was last time any government was honest?
Yeah.
Ever.
We're here to help you. Okay.
Yes. Those are the scariest words you can utter. We're from the government and we're here to help.
Yeah. So just to kind of recap a little bit. So you went from being essentially a hacker in the 80s to expanding your mind on reality, thanks to your parents, and then going into health, I think, because why did you choose? Yeah, that's probably a good question. Why did you choose chiropractor? Like what called you to that?
I went into, as a hobbyist, I was deep into tech, but then after I got busted, I knew I had to walk away from that whole world completely because it would be too tempting for me to get back into it. So I literally, my first job after getting busted and going to jail and getting out was working in a deli making sandwiches. And then I kind of entered into the real world. I grew up in Southern California, and I was a bit of a misfit and a square peg in a round hole in that small town that I grew up in. So when I got to Seattle, it was like a whole new world, and I started meeting people, and they weren't like prejudging me based on things that they had heard or believed about me. So I was a lot of fun just to kind of, be grounded after 6 years basically of being in the world of hacking. And so I just walked away from it all, and I walked away from the friendships I had, and a lot of those people later got busted also. So they should have walked away when I walked away. But then in my 20s, I got into body therapy. I studied massage in Santa Barbara, and it was an incredible course. I studied Rolfing, and it's a deep tissue massage that's incredible for releasing blockages in the fascia. And in that course, he taught us kinesiology, which is muscle testing that can be used in a whole variety of different ways. We learned about the meridian systems from the Chinese medicine, and acupuncture points, and then a whole bunch of other therapies that I started to work with. But I was also working as a waiter in a hotel. I put myself through junior college and then later through college as a waiter. I started as a room service waiter in Ojai, my hometown, in the Ojai Valley Inn. So I was like, driving golf carts around and delivering trays. And it was a really fun job. And I had relatively short hours and made good money. So I did the massage school thinking I was going to work as a massage therapist. And in the end, I was like, no, I'm just going to stick with the waiting, the waiting tables, or not tables at that point, but the room service. And then I started training to learn how to fly hang gliders. So I was doing a bit of massage, but in the end,
I remember this was like in the conversations that we're having around the files. Like, oh, and you're a hang gliding guy. That,
yeah,
yep.
I did that for almost a decade in California, and have amazing, fun stories to tell about those experiences. But so yeah, I was just having fun. I had a sports car which I sold in order to buy a truck so I could have the hang glider on it with the racks and everything. And so I left massage. That was the reason I went back in time to tell that story, is that I loved it, but I didn't want to do it for a living. It was exhausting. There were times when I did like 4 or 5 massages in a day, and I just felt completely depleted afterwards. And so then I went to school in Europe as an exchange student in Italy. I started as a philosophy major, and then I switched to Italian cultural studies. And once I graduated from college, I wanted more of Europe. And so I moved back to Italy, and I just sold everything I owned, my van and my hung up my hang glider in the rafters and never saw it again, and sold my motorcycle, and then moved to Europe, had no work visa. I just figured I'll get a job teaching English. So I moved to Rome and found a job within a couple of weeks, and I was able to support myself. So I did that for about a year and got very bored with teaching English. It was a language I already knew, and I wanted to learn other languages. So I was already fluent in Italian at that point. And so I decided to look into different American companies that had a presence in Italy. And I was hoping to find some kind of work that was more interesting and paid better than the teaching. And I went to the embassy and got a list of American companies, and I focused on the tech companies because I had my background in computers, and I figured, oh, I'm fluent in the language, maybe somebody will want me. And so I got a call from IBM, and they wanted me to interview. So I went in for a couple of interviews, and I got hired as a junior tech writer at IBM. And
I know that.
They didn't know anything about my past, and it was like I had a deferred sentence, so the judge when, I got jail time, I got community service time, and I got fines. And then, but one of the things that was kind was he gave me a 2-year deferred sentence. So if I, good behavior and I didn't get caught again for anything, it was wiped from my record. So I had a clean record, even though I had a conviction. So I was just like, I'm not going to tell them about it. And, maybe they won't find out. So next thing I knew, I was working for IBM and I did that for about a year. But after a year, I already knew that I didn't want to be in tech. And I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life. And I didn't want to spend my life, glued to a computer screen. And so that was when my girlfriend and I, she got pregnant, and we decided we're going to start a family. And we didn't want to do it in Rome, because Rome it's a wonderful city and I love it, but it's extremely chaotic, and it's the last place you want to be pushing a baby stroller around in. And her whole family were up in Sweden. And so that was a logical choice. It was either move back to California, which I didn't want to do because I was on a big adventure, and the cost of living in California, especially raising a family, I was just like, forget it. So moved to Sweden and give me a chance to learn a new language. And so I got there, and I had 2 jobs lined up for tech writing, 2 companies that want to hire me. I thought I was going to pit them against each other for the best salary I could get. And I got there in 2001, literally the same week that the IT bubble burst, and all of the .coms started to go belly up. And suddenly, the week I got there, there was a hiring freeze across the entire country, and I could not find work anywhere. The 2 companies that were both about to, wanted me to sign a contract, they're like, "Whoa, we can't do that now." And all of a sudden, I've got a child on the way. I've left my cushy job at IBM, which was paying well, and I'm living off of savings, and I've got a daughter on the way. And so I looked for work for about 3 months, resume after resume, just like sending them out, nothing. I was finally offered a job the day my daughter was born, and it was for a position that I absolutely didn't want. It was tech writer, or an editing position in a tech writing department with non-native tech writers, non-native English speaking tech writers. I'm like, this sounds like one of the lower pits of hell. I don't want to do this. So I went back to teaching English, and I did that for another 1.5 years or so. And then I slipped on the ice and wrenched my back, and I was helped by a chiropractor, and it was like an immediate relief. And then something similar happened about 2 months later, and a similar experience. And I'm like, I was thinking about massage and how tiring that was, and how profound an impact what this man had done to me, how amazing it was. And I was just like, maybe this is what I should be doing. So I had 3 different experiences that were like just revelations. And that was when I decided I was going to go to school to study chiropractic.
Man, chiropractors are completely undervalued, in my opinion. I don't know, probably because it works. It's the one type of medicine that, like, I believe really works.
I just got back from Librepolko, which is Anarchapulco in Serbia. It was their first year doing this conference. It's another truth, freedom conference, crypto, a lot of that there. And I was invited to speak on matters of health. I thought I would be invited for the stuff that I talked about in Acapulco, but that wasn't the case. They wanted me to do a talk on health. And so it gave me an opportunity to like reconnect with my roots as a chiropractor, because the last 7 years I've been doing all of this research, and I started this YouTube channel, and all these crazy events have happened in my life. So I'm on autopilot with my practice, that I have here in Spain, and I see people, and I have a steady flow of patients coming to me, but I stopped going to all these courses and reading books, and I'm like totally disconnected with chiropractic now after all of these years. So it was really nice to kind of reconnect and tell the story of chiropractic, which is the story that we literally all experienced from 2020 on, because what was done to chiropractic was done to each and every one of us. And that's been, this steamrolling of ancient wisdom when it comes to how the body works and how nature works. And this false dichotomy that exists between between, spirit and matter, and the terrain theory versus microbe theory or germ theory, right? Theory is in the word, but, terrain theory, in my opinion, isn't a theory. We live in the terrain, we interact with the terrain, and terrain is just what is. And then you have germ theory. And as, we know the circles we travel in, that seems to be standing on very flimsy scientific grounds. And yet it's those conclusions that are not based on real science are being used to shove all kinds of different measures down the throats of humanity, as we know from the lockdowns. So, chiropractors were being jailed in the 10s and 20s for practicing medicine without a license. And they're like, we're not practicing medicine at all. What we're doing is completely distinct from what you're doing. We're not doing any of what you're doing. And what we're doing for entirely different reasons. So how are we practicing medicine? And they're like, we don't care. And they had the politicians in their pockets. So they're like jailing chiropractors across the nation. And I mean, in California alone, in 1 year, I can't remember what year, there were like 600 chiropractors that went to jail. It became a badge of honor that these guys would go, and they refused to pay the fines, because if you paid the fine, you were admitting to the crime. And so they did their time. They got out, they went right back to adjusting people. And so if it wasn't for the Spanish flu, chiropractic probably wouldn't exist. Not because chiropractic cures the flu, but because the highest survival rates during the Spanish flu were outdoor hospitals where people were getting fresh air and sunlight, and the chiropractors. And there were studies that were done after the hospitals were filling up across the eastern seaboard, and they were sending people home to die in peace with their family because there's nothing we can do for you, right? And some of those people worked their way in, found their ways to chiropractic offices, and some of them were like, they were too weak to leave, and they were like, there's all these incredible stories of what happened during that time period. Chiropractors are really heroes, and there was a big study that was done afterwards, and the survival rate with chiropractors was 792% higher than it was with the doctors. That's a big number, right? So is chiropractic a cure for the flu? Absolutely not. What are we doing? Well, we're just adjusting the spine, the body, for the purposes of removing interference and assisting the body in doing what it was designed to do, which is heal itself. The principle of innate intelligence is what the chiropractic was founded upon, is this idea that there's a vital force that's flowing through our veins and our nerves and everything that's keeping us organized and healing our cuts and doing everything from the moment of conception to the moment of death. Well, at the moment of death, the body's still there, right? All the flesh, all the blood, everything is still there. But what's gone, right? It's that organizing factor, the spirit, the soul. And they want us to believe consciousness is an accident, an epiphenomenon that comes from a sufficiently complex accidental machine that came from molecules bouncing around and colliding with each other. And it's a ridiculous notion if you have any discernment, in my opinion. So that's the chiropractic. The story of chiropractic really is our story of the last 4 years. And I was going to say that's like everything is circling back around with the same narratives around that now in these last 4 years. And there's history in this. There's history proof of this practice of how it helps the body flow and takes the blockages and takes the blockages out and allows the body to heal itself. Yeah, there's still medical doctors today that are parroting the line that chiropractors are quacks and that they are pseudoscientific. Right. And what they're doing is placebo effect, and they're snake oil salesmen, and we have to protect the public from these people who are trying to milk them, and they say there's no scientific evidence to support it. If you do a PubMed search and you plug in chiropractic, I did it just before I went to the conference, 9,600 studies. That's a big number, for scientific studies like that. So, and now the latest science is all supporting chiropractic, like all the latest discoveries in neurology, and it's far out, and it was fun to talk about it. And like I'll post that talk at some point. Yeah, definitely do. I'm seeing now. I've been going down this road of like the difference between the public sector, private sector, law, legal.
And I see now that there is this mindset or this perspective of facts where, there's two types of ways you can look at government. There's the de facto government, and then there's the de jure government. De facto meaning in fact, meaning, is it peer reviewed? Is it written down? It's just like, if it's not created in the fiction that is the public sector, then it's not real. Where it's like, well, what about experience? What about practice? What about putting your body into the flow of that practice?
So de facto is non-fact.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's all like completely upside down. But that's how I broke it down. It is in fact.
You can defund something. You can take away the funding. You can de facto something.
Yeah. Exactly. See,
I get
that's
it.
why I have this book. That's why I have this book back here, because whenever I'm confused, I'm always, let me look at Black's Law Dictionary and see what the meaning is of these words. Yeah. But the reason I asked you that is because of, so, you went from being this hacker to then working on the body and going deep into health. And then and going back to our conversations around, flat Earth, you started, I guess, going down this road of seeing how this reality works, like what creates this reality around us. And I wanted to bridge those because of the specific type of practice that you're now doing, which is, looking at alternative history. You even said, I didn't know this, but you said that you coined the term biogeology. So tell me a little bit more about this practice that you're doing now that you've been doing for the last 7 years around biogeology.
Well, the whole flat Earth topic, regardless of what the ultimate shape is really fascinating, because once you've gone down enough rabbit holes and you've learned that, like, this is a lie, that's a lie, that, and that certain things are lies. When you see enough of that, and then you get to flat Earth and you start to dig into it, and you're like, wait a minute, this should be really easy for me to just, disprove. It's your brain explodes for a period of time. And I'm skeptical of the people who are like, oh, within a week, I knew it. I knew it was true. Or within 3, I'm like I've got 2 college degrees, and I'm like 6 months into this. I'm still not ready to talk with people about it, But once I kind of realized what was going on, regardless of what the ultimate shape is, I understood that the flat Earth is really the skeleton key of conspiracy theories. The skeleton key that will open any lock, right? And the reason is because if you understand NASA's fakery of the moon landings and the ISS, and you dig into the marijuana thing, and all of these different things, the crazed conspiracy theorist is drawing circles on a corkboard with push pins and gesticulating wildly about this is connected, and that's how it's portrayed in the movie Conspiracy Theorist, right? Mm-hmm. A term that was coined by the CIA for the purposes of diffusing arguments that they find uncomfortable, right? So when you understand that, then you realize that a lot of these seemingly separate things that seem unrelated, that are just like, oh, you believe in that too and that too, they actually are very interrelated, and they dovetail in ways that they just shouldn't. And you start to find that there's just this tapestry that starts to become more and more coherent, rather than I'm doing mental gymnastics and backbends to try and make this crazy thing fit into my wacky theory and that thing too. It's not like that at all. So the understanding that and realizing that the skeleton key of conspiracy theories, and interestingly enough, it's the most heavily censored thing on the internet. Right? It's like, why would that be? I mean, Google went to Congress and specifically stated that they were going to be censoring it because it's so pseudoscientific. And yet you start to, before the algorithms kicked in, it was feeding you information that was coming from people who were doing all kinds of actual empirical scientific experiments and observations, who were speaking very coherently. And sometimes they were engineers, and sometimes they were, people with a lot of knowledge that didn't sound like nutcases at all, that were presenting the information. And yet every time you encounter somebody who's supposedly debunking it, they're strawmanning the shit out of the argument, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, if you're a true scientist, you don't strawman, you steel man. You find the strongest argument that your opponent can possibly offer, and then you defeat that. That's intellectual honesty. That's exercising discernment, and that's not happening in any of the channels that are supposedly taking down flat Earth, right? And then they've got the algorithms to support them, so their numbers go up by the millions. And then the real channels that are doing incredible research and have been for years are just like flatlined, right? They never grow. Like, And then they admit in Congress that they're doing it. And we saw with the fact checkers through the whole COVID thing. It's like they just dial the knob down on everything. They don't even have to really block it entirely. They just keep everybody from seeing it, or they put us all in different little echo chambers so that we're all talking amongst ourselves, but our ideas never reach out into the mainstream consciousness.
I mean, Zuckerberg just came out and said exactly around the CV19 conversations, like, we were pressured by the FBI.
Yeah, a little factoid there that changes everything. But are there any consequences? No. It's just business as usual. And then the mainstream forgets about that the week later because the next psyop and crazy story has come along. So anyway, the whole skeleton key thing for me was really important because what it made me realize is like, I don't know shit about fuck. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can swear here, but okay. It's like, so what is real? What is reality? And it's like, okay, are we in a matrix? Is it a simulation? Those are all valid questions, and I'm undecided on that also. But I operate from kind of a baseline belief that there is a reality that has been created by a creator. And, all the beautiful animals and all the plants and the synergy of the way everything works together perfectly until we come along and fuck it up. All that is just majesty. And when you start to learn about things like sacred geometry and cymatics and how sound vibrations work and light and all this stuff, it's like, to me, you're seeing the fingerprint of the creator everywhere. If you know how to look for it, if you have the eyes to see. And so that's my baseline is I'm like, okay, yeah, the matrix exists. There's no doubt about it. They're messing with our minds through technology. They're imposing all of their things upon us that affect our lives in different ways, and taxes and all this stuff. But I can look out there and I can see the ocean and I can see mountains, and it's a very beautiful part of Spain that I live in. And I look at the rocks, and then I'm like, well, what is a rock really? What have we been told about them? And that was around the time I started to come across different theories about things like rapid petrification, that maybe things petrify far more quickly than we were ever led to believe. And, and then you find out, oh, interesting, carbon dating is hotly contested, and it's only accurate to thousands of years. And the bigger the numbers get, the more crazy it is. And then there's all kinds of things where they bring something that's relatively new and they have it tested, and it shows up with these crazy, this crazy age that is impossible. And so, and that's just one of many, many different supposed proven dating techniques that are up for debate. And so you find out that each. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so like the flat Earth conversation got you questioning, looking at reality, geology.
Yeah, what are mountains? And then there was a video called "No Forests on Flat Earth" that came out about 8 years ago that was looking at things like Devil's Tower in Wyoming. So it's like the whole idea of like, are these plateaus? Are they tree stumps? And it's like, is that possible? And of course, there's loads of people even within the flat Earth community that are hotly contesting that and saying, no, there's no, but it looks like friggin' bark and it looks like root structures and so that kind of got me thinking about big trees as a possibility. And, if it's flat, how big is it? We don't know because, we can't explore past the 60th parallel south. We can't go to the north. The north has changed a lot on the maps over the last few hundred years. There used to be continents up there that are no longer on the maps. So it's just like one thing after another. And then I came across a channel. I hesitate to even say the name anymore because I disagree with so much of his research. But Mud Fossil University, a guy named Roger Spur, and he's talking about what he called mud fossils, which is this idea that things can get buried in mud that are fleshy, right? That like trees, bodies, different things And because the mud is keeping all the oxygen out, it's an anaerobic environment. And so worms and bacteria and different things that need oxygen to thrive can't live in that environment. So basically the meat just sits there unchanged for long periods of time. Well, it doesn't just sit there, because what happens is eventually the gas and the liquid that's in the flesh works its way out, and the minerals that are in the mud surrounding it work their way in. Now, that's not such a radical idea, because even in mainstream geology, that's called permineralization. Everybody knows that petrified trees exist. Those were organic, and now they're stone. Well, we're told that they take 200 to 300 million years to form, which is absolute bullshit. I'll tell you why in a second. But the way that they're telling us that those happen is through that mechanism. But they're telling us it's taking hundreds of millions of years. And the reason it in my opinion, is proven bullshit is that they can create petrified wood in a laboratory in 24 hours that is indistinguishable from normal petrified wood under a microscope. Wow. There are guys that have hung wood in volcanic waters that are really hot with high mineral content, and they hang them, and within 7 years, it's fully petrified, right? So there's all kinds of things that speak against the mainstream narrative when it comes to what we're told about how the layers of stone are formed and how long it takes, and how you date that and how you know that to be true. And so Roger Spurr was also talking about titans. And I was like, okay, that's fun, because one of my favorite movies as a kid in the 80s was Clash of the Titans, because I loved Greek mythology and all those stories. And you had all these heroes, and you had the magic, and you had titans, right? There's this one scene
which is
where
giants, right? It's another word for
we're
giants.
talking about giants the size of mountains, right? So giants, in my opinion, that's just fact. You know, the Smithsonian has squirreled away so much, and there's so many articles, you know, from like old 100-year-old newspapers where they're talking about all their finds, and we're just constantly told that that's myth and fairy tale.
Jack and the Beanstalk, right? It's just a child story.
Yeah, Paul Bunyan.
What
was Paul Bunyan?
Yeah.
He was a titan that went around with a big axe chopping down giant trees. And he had a big ox as his best friend, right? And and he was like mountainous. So I never for a moment thought that there might be any literal credence to those stories. Hold on. It's been my birthday today. I've been hanging out with some really good buddies.
Right. Happy birthday. Long.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Mike.
Thank you. And talking nonstop, as I typically do. So when I have a captive audience. So, yeah, so Roger Spurr was talking about this 1,000-mile long dragon in the Sahara Desert, and he's looking at it with Google Earth, and he's zooming in on different features, and he's saying, if you look here, this dragon, you can see that it's attacking this giant fish. And I'm like, okay, a dragon attacking a fish 1,000 miles long in the Sahara Desert. This is nuts. But then he started talking about, I can't remember.
Actually, I think I saw that. I saw that video where
well, his channel has
the mouth
200,000. His channel has 200,000 followers, and he's got every third video is about that dragon. And maybe that'll help. A little of Alex's leftover cognac. So it turns out there's texts, Greek mythological texts, where they're talking about this great battle between the Leviathan and the Behemoth, and talk about that location in the Sahara, in northern Africa. That's where this great battle took place between this great serpent and this fish. And I'm like, really? That's pretty wild, you know? And he's getting in and looking at in detail at this stuff. And that was when the penny dropped for me, because here in Spain, in the town that I live in, there's a mountain like right back there that my friends and I climbed today. And we went up into what appears to be the eye socket of a giant elephant. And when you look at it from multiple angles, it looks like a creature. Like it doesn't, there's a concept called pareidolia, which from the very first video I ever made on my channel, I was talking about pareidolia. Because I knew if I started talking about these ideas, a lot of people are just going to think I'm batshit crazy, because this is way out there stuff. Like, it's not even possible in the mainstream model, because the gravitational pull is so strong that they would collapse under their own weight, until you find out that gravity also hasn't been proven. And what we're probably looking at is something like electrostatic attraction, which is stronger than the strong force of gravity to the order of 30 zeros. Right.
Wow.
So what causes things to go down is a very deep, profound question that you have to go into a lot to even begin to wrap your head around it. But it's probably not what they tell us. And so I'm like, okay, well, if gravity isn't what they tell us, then the square cube law, which suggests that things would collapse under their own weight as they get too big for their britches, then that's also out the door. And if it's something else that's causing things to go down, maybe that something isn't so strong that it would cause them to collapse. Well, in the ancient, historical narrative in mainstream geology, they're talking about gigantism. We have the dinosaurs, which is also, you can cast that one out, in my opinion. But what about dragons? Every culture around the world has dragons and serpents in their mythologies, and even in their religious texts, right? In some cases. So what if things could be that big? And I just started looking at it, and this mountain is phenomenal. The way it looks, and I've always loved it, and I always thought, oh, it's so cute. There's the elephant. But I never once for a second ever considered that it might have been an elephant once upon a time. And I'm like, there's just no way. So the first thing I did is I got on Google Earth and I started looking at it in 3D, because you can get in from above, and then you can tilt, and you can turn around. And when I did that, within an hour, I was completely blown away, because it wasn't just the head shape was right and the eye socket was correctly placed and correctly shaped. There was also like the cutouts between the head and the shoulders were there on both sides, curving in. There appeared to be a rib cage. There was a deep crevice of a canyon, which I'd hiked multiple times, right between where the legs would go. So within an hour, I had a list of like 10 anatomical features. So that gets back to pareidolia, right? So you look up in a cloud and you see an animal. That's not an animal in the cloud. It's just a trick of the eyes, right? Maybe esoterically or on some energetic level, it is an animal. I don't know. But if you're going to speak about literal, concrete, physical reality, no. You can look I can look at wood and knots and see faces in the knots. Like very easy. Like my artwork behind me is very abstract. People look at it and they see all kinds of things. That's pareidolia. And then the equivalent of that in pattern recognition is called apophenia, where you're recognizing a pattern that doesn't actually exist. So I started looking at the mountain, and I'm just like, okay, hold your horses. Whoa, horsey, this is just too crazy. And I started thinking about all the times I'd been up to this cave, because I'd hiked up there probably 6, 8, 10 times before coming across this crazy idea. And being a chiropractor, I was thinking about anatomy, and I knew from my studies that the eye socket is comprised of 7 different bones, and those bones meet in lines, and those lines are called sutures. So I thought, interesting, I'm going to approach this as just a scientific inquiry. And I got out my anatomy books, and I started really studying the anatomy, and I didn't have elephant anatomy until later. I found like elephant skulls, like people with 4K footage, like it's a big skeleton of a mammoth or an elephant, I don't remember which, and they're just moving around and they're panning the camera around. So I got to see the elephant skull and its shape from all of these different angles. And there's the optic fissure where the optic nerve goes into the brain, right? That's an opening where those bones meet. It's a bigger opening. Then there's other fissures on the bottom where it goes down into the sinuses and into the tear ducts, And so I had this laundry list of features that I would expect to find if there was any truth to this harebrained idea. And, so one of the things I could see already from Google Earth that blew my mind, and every time I talk about it, my hair stands on end like it is now, okay, right, is that we have below our eyes, we have what's called the infra below orbital. This is the orbit, the eye, foramen, which is an opening. So it's the opening below the eye. We have it here, and there's nerves and blood vessels that go in and out. Well, I started looking at where that is on an elephant, and it's here on an elephant, right? They have the trunk, obviously. And the thing is, when you look at this elephant from the side, this mountain, it appears to be laying on its stomach, and the head is tilted forward like this. So that would take this opening, and it would put it there, and it would be going straight in. There's a cave there. So you have the opening of the eye, and then going perpendicular to that away, there's a cave that's a long channel exactly where the infraorbital foramen on an elephant sits. And I'm like, I've already seen the head shape. I've already seen the eye socket. On the like behind the eye, there's a quarter moon discoloration of the mountain that it looks like stone has fallen away, and it's reddish. So thinking about bone, inside bone is where our blood is made. So this mountain is made of limestone, and the limestone in the mainstream geological narrative, we're told, is made of bone. How is that? It's made of coral, shellfish, mollusk, and skeletal remains that have been compacted under the seafloor for hundreds of millions of years, and then tectonic activity has caused the what makes the mountains, has caused these layers to break upward and penetrate the surface, and that's where we get our mountains from. But they're telling us that the limestone layer is made of bone, literally. And so it became this 2-year investigation that was like, I had a laundry list. I have a laundry list now of over 50 anatomical and histological correlations. Histological means tissues. Like if you study what skin is like under a microscope, that's histology. If you study bone under a microscope, that's histology. So it's over 50. That's a big number. If you think about rolling dice, you roll double sixes. What are your odds of rolling it again? The odds get narrower and narrower that you're going to keep rolling double sixes on each throw until it becomes astronomically impossible. So if I've got a vague correlation, okay, maybe that makes the list or maybe not. But if I have a really specific one, like the one I just described, and if people who want a visual for what I'm talking about, if they go to the Unveiling a Titan series on my channel name's there right next to my name. If they go to the Unveiling a Titan series, it's a 6-part series. In the 5th part of that series, the thumbnail for that video shows that foramen that I'm talking about, and me and a friend are standing looking through it. So I went up to the cave with this list, and on that first visit, and I was photographing and filming, I found 10 more anatomical features in the eye of Montco. And that's, now we're getting into astronomical odds. And there's been so many synchronicities and so many things that I knew nothing about when I entered into this inquiry that have kind of fallen in my lap, or people have made comments on my channel and said, hey, did you know about this? And in conversation with friends, like I went up there a couple years later with some friends to show them after I'd already done 4 videos on the subject. And there's this section of inside the eye socket where there's this cresting, rising stone feature that can't have fallen from above because it's smooth and unbroken, the cave, right? And it's cresting upward. And the first time I went up, I'm like, that's in the right position. And it's shaped like the remains of an eyeball. Like if the eyeball had blown out, it's attached to the back of the socket, with the optic nerve and whatever other connections it has. But what would that look like if it blew out? It would kind of look like a cresting wave. It's just like one more thing, And so I was there with my friends, and I was showing them, look at this structure. There's like channels that go in that we're told are formed by water erosion, but it's impossible because they're smooth and there's no partial channels. They're just either a channel or not, and they vary in size dramatically. But they bifurcate just like blood vessels do. Like they branch off like branches of a tree. So you've got a channel going in, and then you have things branching off in different directions that are also perfectly smooth. Water erosion can't do that. You can't convince me. You can't demonstrate it, and you can't convince me that it would ever do that. But what they noticed up there that I had never noticed is that the whole backside of this, and I showed my friends this today, and they were just like, the whole backside of this structure that's sticking up is covered in a 10-inch thick layer of quartz crystal, the entire backside of it. And then there's channels going through, and those channels are lined with quartz crystal. And so I had already developed theories before my friends showed me this, that I'm like finding quartz all over the mountain and the foothills of the mountain. And so I'm finding iron ore and quartz and limestone. But the limestone, there's no hint of shellfish, mollusk, anything. And I've looked at it with a 1000x microscope. This limestone is not formed the way mainstream geology tells us. And I've proven it because there's no hint of any of those things on any of that stone. But it's made out of the same thing, calcium carbonate. So there's these channels going through all this stuff. It matches up perfectly with bone. You've got cortical bone, which are big, thick layers that have very few holes in them. And then you have in the center of it what's called trabecular bone, which looks like Swiss cheese. And it's got all of these smooth channels, and it's fractal, and it keeps going down and down to the microscopic level. And that's where our red blood is produced, right? The red blood cells are produced in the bone marrow, in the long bones, the pelvis, the head. That's where our red blood comes from, right? And so you have red blood and you have plasma. Sorry, I'm just going on.
No. I mean, I can listen to you talk about this so long. I did want to ask you one question because we're getting close to like the hour there. I did want to ask you one big question. This is such a big subject.
It takes.
It is.
I've got hours and hours of video on my.
Yeah,
YouTube
if you guys want to know and go deeper into all this, his YouTube channel is is it Stellium? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Stellium. It's there on the screen.
And then the number 7.
And the number 7, no space. Yeah.
What is that? What does that mean, Stellium?
Stellium is an astrological term. When you have a concentration of 3 or more planets in a particular sign or a particular house, it's a real concentration of energy, and that it's a theme in the chart. And I've had that as an email address for years and years and years. And so when I was trying to decide what to call my channel, I just like, I'll just call it that. It's easy to remember. I like the sound of it. And I have a stellium in my chart. So that's why it's, it's been meaningful to me. But I never anticipated people would start calling me Stellium or Stellium 7. Like,
hey, Stellium.
It's like it's become a nickname now. So that was kind of fun.
The one question I had, I remember seeing it at the event in your presentation. So I'm the crypto guy around blockchain. I'm looking at different ways to store wealth. I like blockchain because it's peer-to-peer. It's giving us back access to something like our own operating system that isn't centralized, so that we can start storing value, and connect to each other. But I often get from the other side.
It's like centralized bartering.
Yeah, centralized bartering. That's really what it is. I often say, it's like, why are we still pricing
bartering?
Decentralized. Bartering. I often say, it's like, why are we still pricing this based on the dollar? Like, why are we deriving value based on its price? It doesn't make sense to me. It's when we use the technology, right? When we utilize it, that's where we flow the value into it, and then we determine the value of that technology, of that tool. But yeah, one of the things
what you would do in a community anyway.
Exactly. This is just I say it's a way to recreate trust. It's an open source system, open ledger, to recreate trust so that we can use it as a stepping stone to go back to trusting ourselves, trusting each other. So I don't even see blockchain as like the end all be all. But right now we're in a transition, and this is the tool that's available to, for us to use and utilize, that's not theirs or part of central systems in the public sector. But often what I get is the argument, well, we got to go back to God's money, gold, commodities, these metals, precious metals. And in your presentation, you spoke about gold. Can you just talk a little bit about gold? Where does it come from, based on your experience?
It's also a deep subject, and I've got a live stream that I did called "The Titanic Trees Made the Gold," and so the trees, but also bodies. Like we have monatomics in our bodies, right? They're the electrolytes, I suppose you would say. Like they're part of blood, but they're so even human bodies, we have a small amount of gold and a small amount of silver. Like we contain everything, right? And so as things petrify, they're going to, be there on some level. Well, where do we get gold from? They mine it primarily from quartz seams. And if you look at any of the recent videos on my channel, you're going to find what I consider to be self-evident, unequivocal evidence that the great trees did exist. The towers, the stumps are not the best evidence. I presented hours and hours of like data point after data point that is so far beyond just the stumps. The stumps may well be trees also, probably, but there's like undeniable evidence. I always send people to a channel called Hangman 1128 because he's had the best boots on the ground footage of anyone in the world, and he's been doing it for years. I just traveled with him in the Black Hills of South Dakota after Music and Sky, had an incredible time. I did a recap of Music and Sky, and then I did a recap of my journeys with him. Watch that, and you will know 100% that the trees exist unless you're denying your senses and you are paradigm blind, another term that I coined, right? Why do experts not see this stuff if there's any truth to it? Because they've been blinded by the paradigm they've been raised in academically, and they can't accept that they might be wrong about such big fundamental things. And so it's paradigm blindness. It's a very real thing. Cognitive dissonance is also very real. They get triggered when you start to tug on the strings of their belief structures. So the trees, I believe the trees and bodies, they make all of these things. And there's probably really powerful events involved that involve, volcanic activity or plasma. There's so much stuff that I've shown when it comes to instant petrification on my channel. Like people don't realize that you can mix two powders together and make a ruby in a microwave in 10 seconds, right? This isn't a repeatable experiment. Now, it's not like a ruby that you might sell on the market that's of super high quality and value. But the fact that you can take something that's it's the second hardest substance known to man after diamond, and you can make it in a microwave in seconds by combining powders and using the plasma that the magnetron of the microwave creates, that's like, that should blow everybody's mind, right? So there's all kinds of things, like talked about the petrified wood. There's old newspaper articles from 100 years ago where they're talking about harvesting petrified forests. Now people pay to go see the little petrified forests, and they're told these narratives about how old it was and how it formed. But they were harvesting huge amounts of gold and silver and copper from petrified forests that were still standing but were stone. So were those trees growing gold and silver and copper? I don't believe so. I think that there's a transmutation of elements that occurred. There's some kind of, like if you look at the Grand Canyon, that's what's known as a Lichtenberg figure. It looks like it was carved out by electricity. You can see videos of people putting electrodes on wood, and it burns in a fractal pattern, and it just creates something that looks identical to the Grand Canyon. Those figures are found all over the world. So I think that there's high power events that are consolidating what may be monatomics into veins, and because that's what happens when you hit things with high amounts of electricity, they align themselves along different lines of current. So that may be what forms, or there may be an actual transmutation of elements. And the example I always come back to for that, which is the most simple and most beautiful, is the egg that is made by a chicken. A chicken pushes out an egg every day, right? They've done experiments where they've looked at the diet of the chicken. They've looked at what the chicken is consuming. It's eating mica, it's eating seeds and different things. And they've looked at the constituent components of the diet of the chicken. And what they found is that the egg itself, the shell, has more calcium in it than the chicken is consuming every day. So that means that the chicken somehow biologically has to be creating calcium. We're told that elements are formed in the heart of stars, and then they're spread out into the universe through supernova. And we have our whole periodic table, and yet plants and animals are transmutating elements and creating elements all the time. And that's a very important factoid that most people are completely unaware of. Somebody did an experiment with a tree. It's in a big pot, and they measured the amount of soil. They weighed the pot and the tree and the soil. Before the experiment began, they put it into a room where all it got was sunlight through the windows and distilled water. So there's no minerals in the water. It's not getting anything that it should be able to use to build and grow. And yet, as that tree lives and grows, it gets bigger and bigger, and it takes on more and more mass. And it weighed more at the end of the 7-year experiment, quite a bit more than when it started. So where's all that material coming from? Mm-hmm. It's creating it from light and distilled water and, whatever was in the soil. So that's important information.
That is, that's you. I haven't used that argument yet when it comes to those individuals that don't like Bitcoin because it's digital and you can't touch it. But I think I want to go deeper into this and use that because it's like, oh, so gold is there's more of it being created, technically, there's something happening in nature that is creating more of it. And then how many mines out there exist that are being held and not distributed into the market for whatever reason, because the mine owners, the ones that own the actual location, don't want to put it into the market.
I think at the highest level, the mining companies know this information. I've had actually people who've worked for mining companies that have commented on my channel and confirmed my conclusions. And so it's why the lie? Why would they? This is amazing. What's wrong with us knowing about titans or giants? Well, if we don't know the truth about the nature of our realm, and we don't know that maybe some mountains were once titans or once trees, and that's where these elements are being grown, and they know the anatomy of it, and they know exactly where to look for something, they've got a big advantage when it comes to which land to buy, which places to mine. So that's a huge thing, is just the control of resources. I have a video on my channel on the live stream tab called Spelunking Titanic Trees. And it's an absolute mind blow because there's some guys called the Action Adventure Twins who go in and they're going down like 1,000 feet down these massive channels that if you understand all the other data points for the big trees, you realize what you're looking at. You're looking at the channels that used to transport water in what is no longer a giant tree. And they're going down, and then they get to the bottom, and they hit a bottom, and then there's snaking channels that go, and then they find another huge drop down. And this is how the root structures of trees are as well. Mm-hmm. And so when you realize that that this all of these precious gems and metals are coming from these kinds of sources, it's pretty far out. It's really fun. I mean,
it is, man.
I never would have dreamed I'd get on all of these subjects. When I started asking these silly questions and trying to approach it rationally and not jump off the cliff, intellectually, and approach it in a methodical, systematic way. Yeah.
No, I love it, man. You have so much experience, and what I love is that, again, you have that healthy skepticism that is pushing you to do the research, to do the work, to poke and prod and figure out, based on your experience. And I think that's so important. Like, it's almost like you're carving out this new, like it is literally like a new genre of
biogeology.
Yeah, biogeology. I mean,
why did I coin that? I coined it because if I'm right about anything, about the big trees, about titans, or about these things. These are I've done a whole lot of videos on these.
Wow, if you guys are listening, he's showing us some stones, but they look like hearts.
Yeah, and that's what I believe they are. And I've got hundreds and hundreds of examples of these that are matching the exact same pattern. And the pattern just happens to line up in so many details with heart anatomy. And I've done so many things. I've CAT scanned them, I've sliced them open, I've broken them apart. And I've shown that over and over again that there's a reoccurring pattern in the stones that should not exist. And the reason I say that is we're told that all of these rocks that I just showed are broken fragments of some larger stony structure that ended up in a river bottom and banging around and smoothed out. That's how we get what we call cobblestones, or polycalcitic conglomerate cobbles, as the mainstream geology would call it. And I've got loads of videos on this subject and lots of empirical evidence suggesting that what we're looking at here is actually a petrified heart. And it's hard for people to understand if they don't know the heart anatomy and they haven't seen the videos. But this is the telltale shape. You have this tapering in because when the heart contracts, it goes in on the sides. At the top of the heart, slightly in the back, you have the aorta and the vena cava, which are the two biggest blood vessel openings in the body. They're the blood going in and out of the heart. The heart folds up. So this is another huge thing that even most cardiologists today don't know about. That's been proven in spades. It's something known as the myocardioventricular band. It was discovered by a Spanish cardiologist, Francisco Torrent Guasp, in 1972. It took him 25 years to break through with this knowledge. He was dissecting thousands of hearts in his home over a period of 20 years. He had a private practice. He was working out of his home. He was a medical doctor. He finally discovered that the heart is a rope. You can literally, if you do it the right way, you can unravel it, and it's one long continuous band. And that's incredibly important for cardiology because you have to know. I
have heard that structure. Recently. Them saying that it's not a pump, it's a vortex.
It's
right?
not a pump, exactly. It's impossible for it to be a pump, and he proved that. And his discoveries have been proven in a variety of different ways, but they still haven't been disseminated into the mainstream consciousness and not even into cardiology programs. So you got people cutting into hearts that don't even know the true anatomic structure of the heart. It's absolutely criminal. So he made this discovery. And when he rolled the heart back up, my mind went because I had already been gathering these stones and cataloging and making videos about these reoccurring features and how much they lined up with hearts. And when I did that, and I was watching this video about his life, it's called The Helical Heart. It's a documentary, The Helical Heart, highly recommended. I've got a number of videos about him and his life on my channel as well. When he rolled it back up, I noticed that there were these points where the folds meet, where you've got fibers going in different directions that create suture lines, same as the word that's used in the eye socket. And I went back to my collection and I found that those suture lines are right there where they should be in the stones.
Wow.
You might not be able to see it here. So you've got the heart, you've got the creases for the openings of the blood vessels. You have the harp shape. They also have a twist at the bottom that looks like a propeller. And that's when the heart contracts, it twists like this. It's utterly mind-blowing. So I've got one stone that I cataloged 23 different anatomical features on one stone. I went in with endoscopic camera to look at the inside of the chambers, and there are other features inside the chambers. It's mind-blowing. And the most mind-blowing thing of all is this guy who made this discovery, who, it eventually made it out there, Paco Guasp, Francisco Torrent Guasp. He lived and worked his entire career out of his home on the foothills of Mont Go. That's the awesome. Elephant Mountain for those who might have forgotten the name, right? What are the odds of that, right? I'm discovering this reoccurring pattern in the stones. I know nothing about the heart. Someone on my channel comments, the heart is a rope. And I'm like, okay, whatever, dude, and then someone else a week later comments, the heart is a rope. And then they said the helical heart. And I was like, what? And I looked up this documentary, utterly mind blown, made this additional 2 discoveries about the spiral and about the lines and the heart stones. And then at the end of the documentary, it's got his name and it says Denia, Spain. And it's literally the town next to me. And I went, what? And he had died 15 years earlier, so I wasn't able to meet him. I met his son, and I've spoken a number of times with one of his best friends, who was the one who first got him the chance to dissect human hearts, because he'd always been doing animal hearts. He'd get them from the butcher. So it's an amazing story. I have so many stories of synchronicity because I've just been kind of going where this whole thing leads me, and I haven't had a plan, and I've just been curious about things, and I just keep getting these little taps on the shoulder, and I'm like the river that's right next to the mountain is called Gata de Gorgos. The Gorgos are the Gorgons, which are 3 sisters in Greek mythology, and one of those 3 sisters was Medusa, the snake-haired lady. What's she known for? Instant petrification.
Yeah.
What are the odds? It's just,
well, I mean, that's funny. I've never actually said it that way in my head. I was like, she turns people into stone, but it's like, no, it's instant petrification. That's literally what it is. Wow. That's amazing.
This one is really shaped like a heart, but usually they're a little more like the other ones I showed. Yeah. Here's one that's still, and you put them underwater, and this pink looks red underwater when they're,
really?
And then this one here, right where the coronary artery is that goes across, I sliced this one open, and you can see quartz in there.
Whoa.
So, I just, one thing, I was talking about the eyeball before, I forgot to finish. So I talked about that 10-inch thick layer of quartz. I already, before my friends discovered that, and I was like, holy shit, that's like the sclera. It's the white of the eye. It's all fatty. I had already kind of predicted or theorized that anything that was fat would petrify to quartz. So in the trees, the sap becomes quartz, but in bodies, your fat, your fascia, your discs, your ligaments, your tendons, your eyes, all of that in my crazy world petrifies to quartz. And so the eyeball structure, that cresting wave, is all covered, the backside, in quartz. What are the odds? This is the frontal bone, this is the maxilla, and then you have the eye socket. And there's a line right here between these 2 bones, right? And that line goes straight back in the eye. And if you watch the Unveiling a Titan video, the 2nd video and the 5th video, I show that right in the cave, if you stand inside the eyeball where we were today and you look in that direction, there is a line that goes exactly where the suture should be between those bones. And it's not a crack in the stone. It's overlapping. It's 2 separate rocky structures creating a line in the exact right place. So, yeah. Is it pareidolia, or is it a matrix and the universe is messing with me? And it's, I don't know. But
it's experience,
I've got hundreds of these in all sizes. It's repeatable. It's scalable. It's predictable. I found them buried up, halfway up the stone like this. And then I've like, oh, that's one. And then I've predicted what the other side is going to look like. And then I pull it out. I did that. There's one of the most recent videos on my channel. I did that. I was out on a hike. I found one that was about this big, and I flipped it over because I knew I could tell I was looking at the front side. They don't tell us that stones have a front or a top or a bottom or a back, right? We're told this is a broken, fragmented, random thing. And this stone, I knew I was looking at the front. I flipped it over, and there was an indentation right at the top on the back where the aorta would have been. So it's just, take it or leave it. Check it out. If it interests
you. What I know about everything I heard from you is that you are, like I said, you're willing to go and experience. And I've always admired people that are willing to do the work, and are willing to put themselves into the middle of the process to experience, and not just like, oh yeah, I went to a university and this is what they told me. And it's like, no, that's just regurgitation, man. You didn't actually go do the work to figure out if that's real or not, if that's a true part of
That's
this
why we
reality.
have to steel man these arguments that we hear that
like
we think are crazy. It's the opposite of straw manning, where you build up a fake argument and then you defeat the fake argument. That's what all the people who are claiming to debunk flat Earth are doing regularly. Is they're boosting up something that the people who are actually doing the research are not claiming, and then they're defeating that. That's intellectual dishonesty, and it's weak. If it was really that easy to debunk, why aren't they going up against the best people in debates? Austin Whitsitt has been debating PhD physicists and teaching them things, right? It's really fascinating, but you have to be really deep into the subject and have already studied a lot of things to even follow the line of conversation, because it's so in depth, and the level of science that they're discussing. It's like your average layman is just going to be like, I don't understand a damn thing they're talking about. So, but the people who've been looking into this for years, they know who's cheating and who's not. And
Well, Mike, this was, my mind is blown. blown. Always, every time I talk to you. Thank you so much for giving me your time, your energy, and going down your journey and all of these different things that you're working on. I mean, like I said, I think you're really paving a path. You're creating a path here, a new genre of education and a new way of thinking. So one last question and we'll wrap it up here. If you guys want to connect with Mike, go to his YouTube channel. It's at Stellium. It's STELLIUM 7. And he's also on Instagram, Stellium 7 on Instagram.
And I don't have any products I'm selling yet.
maybe
I have a book. I finished a book on my hacking story. I never told the story. It's been 35 years since it happened.
I'd love to see.
And so I'm like, I've written the book. I need to get it published, and I'm hoping to do that in the next few months. So keep your eyes open.
That's an interesting story. Definitely going to look out for it.
It's called The Hacker Prince, and it is definitely an interesting story.
Yes, it is. The little bit I've gotten, very interesting. So last question here before we end it up. You're standing in front of millions of people. You have about 90 seconds, like 60 to 90 seconds to leave them with something, advice, a perspective, whatever you want to say in those 60 to 90 seconds. What would you say?
Go into your most cherished beliefs and question them as if you were a person who didn't believe them and was trying to prove them false. Right? That's the first thing that came to my mind, because that's steel manning. And most people never do that. They never do the work. And don't assume that you can't understand something because you haven't studied it. You have the ability to think rationally. You have the ability to use logic. Study logical fallacies, just the top 10 logical fallacies. Learn those, because then you realize how often you're being lied to, and how often when people make claims about things, they're not actually substantiated, and they might not even be doing it intentionally, but they're misleading you about one thing or another. So know those, and then understand that so much of what we've been taught is just complete bullshit. And if you don't do the work to find that out, I say being a conspiracy theorist became a matter of life or death in 2020, right? Because if you didn't have the ability to discern and see through the bullshit and make appropriate decisions and structure your life in a way that allowed you to avoid the supposed pressures, right? Then you probably have something floating around in your bloodstream you don't want. And, who knows how that's going to affect your health and future, or the future health of your children. So it's literally a matter of life or death to do the work, to engage in intellectual discernment and prove things true or false. It's a lot harder to prove things true. It's a lot easier to prove them false. And the more things you prove false, the closer you get to what the truth might be. So that's my elevator speech.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, Mike, so much for your time. Again, if you guys want to connect with him, check him out. His stuff will blow your mind, or at least bring
My camera's down
curiosity.
here, so I'm sorry
Yes.
I didn't have eye contact.
All right. Thank y'all for listening. Thank you, Mike. And last but not least, always remember, gamify your abundance. All right. Love you guys, and we'll see you in the next episode.